Ever feel like you're stuck in a loop, reliving the same argument over and over again with someone you love?
It's like a broken record, right?
Totally. But what if I told you those recurring clashes could actually help your relationship? Today, we're taking a deep dive into breaking free from those frustrating cycles. We're looking for real peace this time.
So fascinating, this idea that conflict isn't always bad.
Right.
The heart-to-heart episode called Breaking the Cycle had some really insightful
Oh,
guests,
yeah?
therapists and communication coaches, even a couple who totally transformed their relationship. It's all about how we handle conflict.
I am so ready for this. Where do we even start untangling these relationship knots?
Well, first of all, heart-to-heart makes this great point.
Yeah.
Expecting zero conflict is kind of like expecting perfect weather every day. It's just not going to happen.
Right. Everyone's different.
Exactly. Two people, their own needs, their past experiences, bound to bump heads sometimes.
So it's not about never disagreeing.
Nope. It's more about learning to handle those disagreements, actually using them to grow closer.
I like that.
And, heart to heart really dives into how those repetitive conflicts, the ones that keep coming back, they can point to deeper issues.
Ooh, interesting. Like what?
The therapist they had on actually compared it to your car's dashboard.
Okay.
That warning light flashes, something needs attention.
That's a great way to put it. So how do we figure out what's setting off those warning lights in our own relationships?
Well, they talked about becoming relationship detectives,
I like it.
identifying our triggers.
I've heard of those. What's the best way to figure that out?
They actually gave a two-step process. First, think back to those arguments.
Okay.
What keeps coming up? Finances? Chores? Maybe how you deal with each other's families?
Gotcha, spotting the patterns. But then how do you talk to your partner about all this?
Without starting a whole new fight, that's step 2 communication.
Oh, right.
Open, honest communication.
Easier said than done sometimes.
A Heart to Heart had this really powerful story about a couple who just bickered constantly.
Rip.
Tiny little things, always arguing. Turned out the real problem was financial stress.
Wow, hidden trigger. Did things get better once they figured that out?
Completely different dynamic once they addressed the real issue, not just the surface stuff.
Makes you think. So say we found those triggers. Now what? How do we actually deal with conflict when it comes up?
Heart to Heart had a whole section on healthy communication. They called it Building Your Communication Toolkit.
I'm listening.
And one of the best tools, I statements.
Oh, I've heard of those.
Hmm.
To be honest, though, I'm not always sure how to use them.
It's pretty simple, actually. Instead of saying you always or you never, you focus on expressing your own feelings. No blame or accusations.
But like instead of saying, you always leave your clothes on the floor.
You might say, I feel overwhelmed when the bedroom's cluttered.
Oh, interesting. It's about how you feel.
Exactly. And the psychologist they interviewed, she said it works because it encourages empathy. When you share your feelings that way, your partner's more likely to understand, to connect with you.
No more defensiveness.
Right. So it's less about attacking, more about creating a safe space to be heard for both of you.
Makes sense.
And Heart to Heart had another key tool, active listening.
Oh, active listening? Seems like everybody talks about that.
But this communication coach on the show, he had the perfect way of explaining it. Active listening means really absorbing what your partner's saying. Words, body language, everything. Trying to understand their point of view.
Even if you don't agree.
Exactly. It's all about making your partner feel heard and understood. Can really de-escalate things when you're in the middle of a disagreement.
That makes a lot of sense. So statements and active listening, those are the basics.
Yeah, those are big ones. But there's more. Heart to Heart also talked about finding common ground.
Okay, but how do you go from arguing to common ground?
Well, they said it's about identifying those shared goals in your relationship. Things like a peaceful home, raising kids with the same values, feeling understood and respected by each other.
So those are the things you both want, even when you disagree on how to get there.
Exactly. And that's where compromise comes in.
Compromise. Okay. What's your take on that?
They made a really important point. Compromise isn't about one person winning.
It's not a competition?
Nope, it's about finding a solution that works for both of you.
I like that. Win-win.
Sometimes you even end up with a solution that neither of you would have come up with on your own.
Okay, I'm loving all this practical stuff. Now, what about those moments when things get really heated?
Heart to Heart did talk about specific techniques for those moments.
Like what?
They call them moves you can use when you're right in the thick of it. And one of the most classic, timeout.
A good old timeout.
Simple, but it works. Things are getting out of control. Emotions are high.
Yeah.
Agree to step away for a bit. Come back later when you've both cooled down.
Oh, that's good. I need to get better at that. I always want to keep talking it out, but it usually just makes it worse.
Like trying to put out a fire with more fire. Heart to heart, said, taking a break, lets you get your composure back. Then you can actually think clearly.
That's smart. Takes the pressure off.
And then when you come back, you can actually use those I statements and active listening skills. They also highlighted setting ground rules for those conversations.
Ground rules. Interesting. Like what kind of ground rules?
Think of it like setting up a safe space for your discussion. No name calling, only one person talking at a time, using a calm tone of voice. Simple things.
So it's more like a productive conversation, less like a yelling match.
They quoted a family mediator who said those ground rules can actually help people feel safe enough to express themselves. No fear of things getting out of control.
Wow, I love that. Safety and respect even when you're disagreeing. Heart to Heart also talked about those times when, even with the best intentions,
Yeah.
you just need a little extra help, right?
They were really good about that, actually. Reminding people that it's okay to admit when you're in over your head.
So when do you know it's time to get some outside help?
Well, they said sometimes we have blind spots in our relationships.
We can't see the forest for the trees.
Right. We're too close to the situation. A therapist can provide that outside perspective.
Plus, they work with tons of couples.
Exactly. They have experience. They can give you tools specifically for your situation.
And there's something about having someone neutral there to help keep things calm.
Totally. And Heart to Heart had this amazing story about a couple whose relationship was completely transformed through therapy. Said it was a total game changer.
That's encouraging. So if you're feeling stuck, maybe it's time to reach out. Could be the best thing you ever do for your relationship. This has been eye-opening, just this first part of our deep dive. From those repeating conflicts being signals to I statements and active listening to even knowing when to get professional help.
And we've only just started. Heart to Heart has even more wisdom about breaking free from those relationship patterns.
Well, I am ready to dive back in.
So before the break, we were talking about getting professional help with conflict.
Right.
And Heart to Heart made this other really good point.
Oh, yeah.
Even with therapists and all the right tools, change really starts with you, each person individually.
So it's not about changing my partner, more about how I deal with conflict.
It's tough, right?
Not gonna lie, it's hard to admit sometimes.
It's a journey. Heart to Heart was pretty honest about that. Takes effort to look at your own triggers and those old patterns.
All those beliefs we bring to our relationship.
Yeah, all that baggage. So how do we actually start that inner work?
It feels kind of overwhelming.
They had a really good exercise. Think back to a recent fight you had.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what did I do? Did I shut down, get all defensive, maybe even make things worse?
Ooh, holding up a mirror to yourself.
Not always fun, but it's honest. And the key is to be curious, not judgmental. It's not about beating yourself up.
So you can see your own patterns.
Exactly. And then you can start making different choices. Even small changes can make a difference.
So if I react differently, it can change the whole dynamic.
They give this great example. Imagine your partner's upset, starting to spiral.
Yeah.
If you can stay calm, just listen without getting defensive, it can actually de-escalate things.
Like you're modeling a better way to handle it.
Right. And Heart to Heart even said those positive patterns can be contagious. They spread through the relationship. Another thing they talked about that I thought was really interesting, setting boundaries.
Ooh, that's a tough one for me. I tend to let things slide. I think I'm being easygoing, but then I just end up resentful.
Heart to Heart was really clear about that. Boundaries are super important for protecting yourself, for having a healthy relationship.
It's not about controlling the other person.
Right. It's about knowing what you're okay with, what you're not okay with, and communicating that.
So it's about respecting yourself as much as you respect your partner.
Exactly. And boundaries can change too. What worked for you 5 years ago might not work now, and that's totally fine.
I was also wondering about compromise. I think a lot of people see it as a bad thing.
Like you're giving up something you want.
Yeah, exactly.
They had a really good perspective on that. Compromise isn't about losing.
Okay.
It's about finding a solution that works for both of you. You're working together, not against each other.
I like that. A win-win.
Sometimes you even have to let go of being right all the time.
So we've talked about what to do when you're fighting. But what about things to avoid? Did Heart to Heart talk about any pitfalls?
Well, they didn't have a specific list,
Okay.
but they did mention a few things, like don't play the blame game.
Because then it's just about who's right, not about fixing the problem.
Exactly. Heart to Heart said blame just makes people defensive. Nobody wants to listen when they feel attacked.
So if I'm feeling hurt, what's a better way to handle it?
They said it's about owning your own feelings. Instead of saying, you always make me feel,
Yeah.
try saying something like, I feel hurt when, or I need. Takes practice, but it can really change things.
Focusing on my side of the street.
Exactly. And another thing they warned against, bringing up old stuff.
Ooh, yeah. Easy to do when you're upset.
It is, but they said it just makes things worse, like adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
You can't solve a current problem if you're stuck in the past.
Focus on one thing at a time.
And this is a big one. Heart to Heart reminded everyone that conflict doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Wait, really?
Not good exactly, but it can be an opportunity.
An opportunity.
If you handle it the right way, conflict can actually make your relationship stronger.
Interesting.
So it's not about being afraid of conflict. It's about being open to it, seeing the possibilities.
They actually said that.
They said conflict is often about unmet needs or just seeing things differently.
So it's not about winning or losing.
Right. It's about understanding each other better.
They even said conflict can lead to positive change.
They did. Like a chance to adjust things, get back on track, find more harmony.
Okay, my mind is blown. This heart-to-heart episode is amazing. We've covered so much. Self-reflection, boundaries, even looking at conflict in a whole new way.
And there's still more. Heart to Heart has even more strategies for putting all this into action.
I can't wait to hear what else they have to say. We've been digging deep into conflict in relationships, thanks to Heart to Heart.
So many great insights, right?
Yeah, we've got all these tools now.
Like identifying triggers, those communication skills.
But the real test is actually using them.
When things get heated.
Exactly. It's easy to talk about staying calm when you're not actually in a fight.
Right. It's different when those emotions are running high.
So how do we bridge that gap, make those tools more automatic?
Heart to Heart had this analogy. They said, think of it like learning a new dance.
Okay, a relationship dance.
At first it feels awkward. You might step on some toes.
Oh, I know that feeling.
But you practice. It gets smoother, more natural. Eventually those moves are just second nature.
So how do we practice for those conflict moments? Do we like stage arguments or something
You could. But Heart to Heart actually suggested role-playing.
with your partner?
Yeah, pick a common fight you have.
Like money or chores?
Exactly.
I see.
Then practice using those communication tools.
I like that. It's like a safe space to experiment.
You can see what works, what doesn't, no pressure.
A dress rehearsal before the real thing. Any other tips for using these tools every day?
Heart to Heart said visual reminders can be really helpful.
Like what?
Maybe the list of those communication skills on the fridge,
Right.
or a note on your mirror, just something to remind you when things get tense.
Like a little pep talk from your best self.
Amen.
And speaking of reminders, they also talked about self-care.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
Always up for self-care tips.
They said you can't give what you don't have.
Makes sense.
If you're already stressed and exhausted, it's harder to deal with conflict. You're more likely to just react.
Like when you're trying to have a serious conversation and you're also angry. Bad combo.
So take care of yourself. Sleep, good food, exercise, things that make you happy. It builds up your resilience. Then you can handle those tough moments better.
And one last thing Heart to Heart said.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Don't try to do it all yourself.
Right?
If you're really stuck, if those tools aren't working, talk to someone.
A therapist, a counselor.
Even a good friend. There's no shame in getting support.
I think that's such an important message. So this deep dive into breaking the cycle has been incredible.
Yeah, we've learned so much.
About what conflict really is, how to identify those triggers, communication skills,
Yeah.
compromise, and knowing when to get help.
It's been quite a journey. Heart to Heart gave us so much to think about.
And I think the biggest takeaway for me is this. Conflict happens, but it doesn't have to be a disaster.
We get to choose how we react.
And with the right tools, the right mindset, we can actually use those tough moments to grow closer.
To build a stronger relationship.
So think about it. What's one small change you're willing to try in your own relationships? Remember, even tiny changes can make a big difference. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.